the sons of Zebedee came to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you are asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared." When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is the word of the Lord.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Leslie. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and it's good to be here together today. If you don't know this about me, maybe you don't, but I grew up in the eastern part of the wooded areas of Virginia, while my extended family lived over in the western part of state in the Appalachian Mountains. And I love to go visit my family there, especially in the summer. And my grandparents, they had these huge gardens, and so I would spend my summer days driving tractors and splashing in creeks, as well as soaking up as much of the country life as I could. My cousin Glenn lived next door to my grandparents, and he had, I think, almost every kind of animal possible for a farm, from cows to sheep to pigs and goats and peacocks and emus and pheasants. I mean, the list goes on. And even today, he has several farms that he has animals, all kinds of animals there as well. He just loves it. And so I love to be there. The animal, though, that he has the most of is the chickens. And if you're not familiar with chickens, they're interesting birds. In fact, you can take any 10 chickens, put them in the same space, in the same coop, and throw out some food and step back and watch. And that these chickens don't immediately just go and eat. In fact, they first need to determine who's in charge. And so through a lot of clucking and scratching and lots of noise, they determine who is the top bird all the way down to chicken number 10. And if you're number 1, you get to eat first, you get to peck whoever you want, and pick on all the other chickens. Meanwhile, poor chicken number 10 gets picked on by everybody, and has no one to peck. There was a Norwegian biologist who studied this back in the early 1900s and realized that this same pattern that's seen in chickens is actually the same pattern that we see in human behavior. Because listen, if you take 10 people, any 10 people, put them into a room, spread some food out, give it a few moments, and no one's literally pecking each other, I don't think. But through conversation, through looks, whatever it might be, these 10 people start to determine who is chicken number 1 all the way down to chicken number 10. It comes through conversations or through education or looks or wealth or social success or whatever it might be, and we start to rank ourselves in this group. We see it in schools, we see it in sports, we see it in workplaces, in our neighborhoods, yes, even in the church. Even in the church, we start to size ourselves up and rank ourselves in comparison to everybody else around us to determine who's the top, who deserves the most opportunities, who also then gets pushed out. We do this. And the question is, though, whether it's not going to be through squabbling and scratching and pecking, but we form these pecking orders within all the social circles that we find ourselves. And this behavior, though, is coming at us from our society, from our culture, from the world around us, that's screaming out, fight to be on the top, fight for first place no matter what. But this mindset surrounding us in our culture today is nothing new. It's nothing new. It's been around for quite some time. In fact, we see it here in Mark chapter 10. In Mark chapter 10, as Jesus and his disciples are going towards Jerusalem, on the road, walking towards Jerusalem, to the place where Jesus said he will suffer and die. And in verses 32 through 34, Jesus explains to his disciples that he will be mocked and flogged and crucified, and this is not the first time. It's not the first time that they're hearing this. You would think that after the third time, Jesus is now telling them for the third time, this is what's going to happen to him. You would think the disciples would start to wonder, is this going to happen to us too? Is this our journey as well because we're associated with Jesus? But that definitely was not on their minds, because look, verse 35, James and John comes to Jesus and says, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we want." It's like completely oblivious. Jesus, just do for us whatever we want. They come to Jesus with saying, "Give us a blank check. Do whatever we want. Just say yes, Jesus. Don't even know what it is, but just say yes." And we think, how strange. What kind of question is this? But listen, don't we do the same thing as well to God? We go to him in prayer and ask, "God, do this for me whenever I want, however I want, whatever I want." We do the same thing in asking God. We want this blank check before us. This is what James and John wanted in verse 36. They said to Jesus, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." That's their request. Let us sit at your right and let us sit at your left. And this is an interesting request because Jesus earlier in the question right before, he asked them, "What do you want me to do for you?" Such a compassionate response. He doesn't shame them for saying such a bold request to him. He doesn't shame them or come down upon them or condemn them for their arrogance or their audacity to say, "Do for us whatever we want." No, Jesus, he has this response that he wants them to come to him. "What do you want me to do for you?" He comes to them and wants them to express their desires. And James and John want to sit on the right and sit on the left of Jesus. It's a request. It's a request around status. It's a request for the chance to be at the top of the pecking order. The top, first place. You see, they believe Jesus. They believe Jesus to be the one to come and overthrow the Roman oppression, overthrow the governments, and set up a kingdom. And so they wanted to be at the right. They wanted to be at the left, these places of power, these places of influence. As Jesus was right in the middle, ruling it all, they wanted to be right next to him. Now, their ambition was fueled most likely by an earlier conversation that we have recorded in another gospel of Matthew. And the disciples, they're confused, they're discouraged to Jesus. They come to him and say, Jesus, we've given everything up for you. We've given everything up for you. What's in it for us? What's in it for us? To which Jesus told them, he said that he's going to have a glorious throne, and you who have followed me will sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Sounds pretty good. And so no one would blame them for wanting these best seats. This is the chance of greatness. This is the chance that they've been wanting. And so the trick, though, is that in God's kingdom, it's not what they thought. In God's kingdom, you see, greatness is not measured by position or power or influence, but that greatness is not in the gaining. It's in the giving. It's in the giving. It's not measured in how much position or power or influence that's gained. It's measured in giving. It's so countercultural. So countercultural, and so it takes focus and it takes intention to walk this way of Jesus, in this upside down way. Such an upside down way in following Jesus. But you see, left to ourselves, left to myself, left to ourselves, we're naturally not going to go that way. We're naturally not going to move in that direction. That's why these spiritual disciplines that we've been unpacking and walking through these past few weeks help, because they're more than just actions. They're more than just actions, but that they shape our hearts. They start to shape our hearts because, listen, God's not after behavior modification. He's not after behavior modification by just doing these few things, that God's after life transformation. He's after the transformation of our hearts and of our minds from the inside out. And so these disciplines, they help form us into the way of Jesus and shape us into who we are, not just in what we do. Not just in what we do. And so today, as we consider how to follow Jesus, how to follow in his way, how to follow him deeper, how to follow him more earnestly, we're going to discover today that embodying the way of Jesus is to sacrifice, to surrender, and to serve. Embodying the way of Jesus is to sacrifice, surrender, and serve. Well, first here, to sacrifice. So look here in verse 38 as Jesus responds to their request to being at his left and at his right. In verse 38, Jesus says, "You don't know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. "We can." The disciples, they proudly or naively respond and agree that they can handle whatever it is, Jesus, that you have. Whatever it is, Jesus, we can go through it, we can endure, especially if it means, Jesus, we're going to be great. Especially if it means we're going to get what we want. And most likely their confidence is coming out of an excitement and anticipation more so than understanding, because the cup that Jesus is referring to here is his suffering. And the baptism, it's referring to his death. And so Jesus, he must suffer and die. The disciples, though, are all caught up in this pursuit of greatness through position and through title and through the responsibilities that they were anticipating and wanting to be a part of, but they completely missed what Jesus was talking about just moments earlier. They completely missed it by daydreaming about what could be. And they missed that true glory. True glory comes through sacrifice. And that the crown comes with the cross. They missed it completely, that following Jesus is not just being willing to reign with him, but it's willing to suffer with him as well. Jesus continues here, verse 39 to them. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink, and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. Jesus is quite clear here. He's quite clear here that to follow him, it costs. To follow him, it costs. And as verse 39 we read here, it says, you will drink. You will be baptized. You will drink of the cup. You will be baptized with the baptism. And it's not the same cup of Jesus, of this judgment of God, of the sins of the whole world, but that they would suffer through persecution of humanity. And it proved to be true that James was the first martyr soon after the resurrection of Jesus, lost his life for his faith, as we read in the book of Acts. And John, even though he was not executed, he was sentenced and exiled to the island of Patmos, where he lived out all of his rest of his days there in suffering. And he likely heard, though, of all the deaths of the other disciples as they stood for their belief and faith in Jesus, the resurrected Lord, as they faced persecution, put to death for their faith. And they all the disciples realized firsthand that there's a cost. There's a cost in following Jesus. Now, most likely, none of us here are going to lose our lives for our faith. We live in a world that allows the expression of faith, no matter who you follow. And so that's probably not the way in which we will experience that kind of suffering or sacrifice, but we all are called to live sacrificially. We're all called to live sacrificially as we follow Jesus, because listen, following Jesus is not to be another addition to our lives. It's supposed to completely reorder everything about our days, everything about our lives, that there's a cost. Might be a cost to our pride, a cost to our time, a cost to our resources, a cost to even maybe some relationships. It might cause us the cost to forgive when it's hard, and to speak truth in love when it's so unpopular, or maybe even to show up when it's inconvenient. James and John, they literally gave their lives. And our sacrifice might look different. Probably will look different, but we're still called to the same. The same call goes out to us that Jesus says that anyone who wants to follow me, anyone who wants to be my disciple, must deny himself, take up their cross daily, and follow me. Take up their cross daily and follow me. So the question isn't if. The question isn't if it's going to cost. The question is what? What is the cost in following the ways of Jesus? You see, greatness is not about gaining. Greatness is found in the giving. Greatness is found in the giving. To embody the way of Jesus is to sacrifice. Secondly, we see that it's also to surrender. It's also to surrender. Now, perhaps James and John, they were out going rogue, asking Jesus these crazy questions, or maybe not. Verse 41 sounds like they're not too far off what everybody else was thinking. It says, when the 10 heard about what James and John were doing, they became indignant with James and John. They were furious. They were upset of what these guys were doing. And it's not because they were appalled that they could ask such a thing. No, actually, they were completely upset because they didn't get to Jesus first. They didn't get the question out first. They didn't get first in line. And so the fact that the other disciples were angered at James and John for getting to Jesus first just shows that their heart and their spirit was no better than the other brothers. No better. They all wanted to be first. They all wanted to be the greatest. They all wanted to be at the top of the pecking order. And so Jesus uses this situation to teach an important lesson to the whole group. And so in verse 42, Jesus calls them all together, and he says, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them." Jesus is taking a pretty common example that his disciples would have known. You see how the Roman government, the Roman officials, these rulers, these leaders all around, you see how they treat those in the community, treat those around them. It's normal, it's acceptable for people in power, people in influence to be this way. They lord it over others. They exercise their authority over others. And this imagery the imagery that's implied here in the Greek is someone sitting on another person, or pressing down with their hands on someone else. And it's the worldly expression. It's the expected way in which people achieve influence and power and position and greatness, is to make everyone else pushed down, hold down, in order to elevate the other, in order to make that person great, that person powerful, that person influential. And so this is what the disciples are used to. This is what the disciples have seen. So Jesus is saying, you've noticed this is what happens around you. And not much has changed today, has it? Not much has changed today, that there's pressure all around us to control and outdo and hold people down everywhere around us, and in our school and work and social settings in our neighborhoods. And we might not physically be sitting on someone or holding them back with our hands. But we often do it through our words, through intimidation, through manipulation. We downplay other people's success. We downplay other people's achievements as if we acknowledge what happened, what good happened in them, that it might somehow get them ahead of us. And so we might just brush by what's happening around us, brush a coworker or a spouse, whatever it might be, brush past it so that we won't be disadvantaged. Or we might see it in the way in which we use our words. We use our appearance, we use our possessions, or even how we spend our time by filling our calendar full of things or work, activities, so that we appear to be needed and busy. So we look more influential, important, and great compared to those around us, more impressive. Maybe we hold back compliments or praise. There's so many different ways in which we might, again, not physically be holding someone back, but in doing the same thing, all to lift ourselves up and keeping those around us pushed down. Since my husband is from South Africa, there's many times where we go back and visit family. And every other year or so. And one of the previous times we were there, we were in Cape Town, and we visited the Two Oceans Aquarium. And inside the main doors of this aquarium is this large cylindrical aquarium right at the front with beautiful, brightly colored fish, and one of them being pawpaw the pufferfish. Pawpaw the pufferfish is a bright yellow, beautiful fish with black spots, and he has just one eye. And all of this, uncommon characteristics of a pufferfish. And pufferfish are interesting in that they don't camouflage against predators. How they defend themselves is they rapidly suck in a lot of water in order to fill their elastic stomachs full and make them appear many times larger than they actually are, as a way to intimidate, and a way to look unappetizing to those who might want to come for a snack. The interesting thing, though, is that even though they are quite cute as they fill up with water and they have these little bitty lips, that even though they might look cute, they in fact are quite dangerous because they contain a deadly toxic substance within them that is deadly to some fish. It also is maybe foul to some others as well, but they don't want anyone to mess with them. by puffing themselves up to appear bigger than they actually are. They want to be left alone. And yes, they are dangerous to other fish, but even more so to humans, in that their toxic substance contains enough poison to take out 30 human adults. And there is no known antidote. So Pawpaw might look quite cute and harmless, but in reality, he is quite dangerous. He's quite deadly. You know, the same is true for us, that we puff ourselves up with pride. Puff ourselves up to impress and intimidate. And you know what? Pride leaves an unappetizing, foul taste in the mouths of those around us. It does. And pride is toxic to relationships. And like the puffer fish, it's poison that it's often acceptable today, though. People are encouraged to do whatever it takes to appear bigger, to appear better, to be greater. And we inflate ourselves up and promote our own success and intimidate and get ahead and push others down. But Jesus is acknowledging everything, the whole acceptable way in the world, in the culture, not just back then, but even today. And he says, followers of me, if you're going to walk in my way, you know what's around, you know what's acceptable. But Jesus says to his followers, not so with you. Not so with you. There's another way in which we are called to live. Not so with you, because in the kingdom of God, the goal is not gaining, it's giving. It's giving. And the way of the kingdom is not stepping on others and getting ahead of others to try appear greater, but that following Jesus, it's about surrendering power, surrendering influence, surrendering resources, surrendering time, the things that we have in our hand that are for us to gain. And we open them up and surrender them over to Jesus. We surrender them over to him. The question is, what are we going to do with what's in our hand? Are we going to turn it around and use it to push other people down? Or are we going to turn it up and surrender and say, God, whatever it is, you use it as I follow after you? The question is for us. And so maybe it is to create space for others to succeed. Maybe it looks like for giving space for a child to try. Surrendering over time and resources and influence and position might look like allowing a coworker to get the credit, or a sibling to succeed, or a spouse to speak, or a friend to dream. You see, the goal is not to push down, but instead to lift up. That's how we walk in the way of Jesus. Greatness, it's not in gaining, but it's in giving. And so we sacrifice, we surrender. And lastly, we see that we serve. That embodying the way of Jesus is to serve. Look here as verse 43 continues. Jesus says, instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. You see, in God's kingdom, greatness is not defined in power. Greatness is not defined by position, but it's defined by serving. It's defined by serving, that to be great, be a servant. You want to be first? Be a slave, which seems to be, makes no logical sense. It doesn't make sense. It seems to be so out of this world, but because both of these roles, a servant and a slave, were the lowest of the Jewish society. And those two roles are what Jesus points to and says, this is the example of greatness. Mind-blowing. Doesn't make any sense. But Jesus is saying, because the uniting thread, the common thread between both of these positions is that they shape their lives around serving. They shape their lives around serving others. And here's the twist that in the kingdom of God, when you serve other people, you ultimately are serving the Master, Jesus Christ. That is who we serve. When we serve one another, we are ultimately serving Jesus, because Jesus puts it this way, he says that whoever wants to serve, whatever you've done for one of the least of these, whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done it for me. Such a contrast. Whatever you've done for one of the least of these, it's as if you are doing it for Jesus Christ himself. So you see, to live the way of Jesus is to serve. It's to serve others, and it's not just for their benefit, but really it's done out of love for Jesus. It's done out of love for our master, and that serving others, it's challenging. It is. It's challenging. I ran across a Facebook poll, which obviously is all truth on Facebook, A Facebook poll that asked what holds people back? What's the struggle with people? Why is it hard for people to serve? And responses of it doesn't fit into our schedule, or it feels like there's an endless needs in front of us, or that there's not enough energy as it comes to the end of a long day. And one respondent says the reason that it's so difficult to serve other people is because of the other people. It's so true. It's so true that serving others, it is time consuming. It's time consuming, it's inconvenient and exhausting, but Jesus wanted his followers. Jesus invites his followers to set aside personal agenda, set aside plans, set aside whatever it is that holds us back, and instead to serve. Richard Foster puts it this way, captures this in his book, Celebrations of Discipline, and he writes this: there is a difference between choosing to serve and choosing to be a servant. There's a difference between choosing to serve and choosing to be a servant. When I choose to serve, I retain control about whom I serve and when I serve. But when I choose to be a servant, I have given up all rights and all control. There's a difference. You see, serving is not just to be something that we add to our task list of things we got to do, to our already busy schedules. It's not just another thing for us to do, but instead it's not. But instead it's supposed to be adopting a lifestyle, adopting a way of life that humbly serves others day in and day out. Foster also in his book lists out 9 ways of serving. 9 types of service, and I think it's helpful because so many times we can get into this narrow view of what it is to serve one another. And so he writes out these 9 ways of the service of hiddenness, serving when no one else knows that you're serving. It's a hard one. The service of small things, doing the things that seem to be so menial, doesn't make a difference. That's a service. The service of guarding the reputation of others, that when you're in conversations and there's gossip going on, that you take a stand of protection of others, those around you, whether you know them or not, that you cut it down. That's a service. The service of being served, which is difficult for us, especially if you like to be the one who's busy and doing other things, but allowing others to serve you, that's a service. The service of common courtesy, kindness and compassion to those you don't even know. The service of hospitality, welcoming people into your home, into these safe spaces. The service of listening. Service of listening. A service of bearing the burdens of each other, whether in prayer, whether just sitting beside one who's grieving, who's going through something. That's a service. The service of sharing the word of life with one another. Sharing scriptures, encouragements from God's word, that's a service. So there's many ways in which we roll up our sleeves and we serve. Not just, again, another thing to check off our list. Okay, I did my service today. Got my community service hours for the day. No, but this is a way of life. A way of life, an attitude of our hearts, a posture of our lives that we serve. And the Bible encourages all these kinds of ways, and that the benefit is not just for the one being served, but actually it's the benefit of the one who's serving as well. And that sometimes the hardest people to serve, are the ones we live with. It's the one you're sitting beside right now. Don't look at him. Sometimes they're the hardest ones to serve. Sometimes it feels like it's easier to travel halfway around the world, go halfway around the world and help strangers, show up for them and meet their needs, than serve those who are closest to us. Because it can be hard. It's hard to give a kind word to a child who just gets under your skin. Or it's difficult to forgive a spouse, or praise your sibling, or to love a parent. But the truth is that service begins in everyday moments, starting with those who are right under our own roof. It's because in these small, unnoticed acts that our love for Christ is fully expressed. It's fully expressed, and not for their sake. Listen, it's not for their sake, but it's because of the love we have for Jesus. That's why we serve. Being a servant, being the least, it goes against our natural human bent, our human drive, which is full of self-interest and self-ambition and the tendency of self-centeredness. This is our human sinful nature. And it gets in the way of us serving God and serving others. It gets in the way. The reason why we can't experience true servanthood is because we're gripped by sin and selfishness. And Jesus says, this is the reason exactly why I came. Jesus in verse 45 gave the reason. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. That's why Jesus came, to serve, to show that true greatness is not in gaining, but that it's in giving. All throughout the first century, humility was reserved only for kings and rulers. You only serve those who were above you. Rarely would you serve someone who's your equal. Never for someone who's below you, who's beneath you. But then enters Jesus, born in a manger, dying on a cross, turned the world's idea of greatness completely upside down. That this apparent weakness of a man on a cross was the greatest display of power the world has ever known. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, as Jesus was facing death on the cross, he kneeled before his Father and he prayed, "Take this cup from me." This cup that Jesus spoke about to James and John and the other disciples. He says, "Take it from me, this cup of suffering, this cup of death. Take it." But then he prayed, "Yet not what I will, but what you will." His humility, his willingness to serve, to lay down his life. You know, when James and John, they asked Jesus to sit at his right and left in his glory, they completely missed the point. They completely missed the point. You see, James and John, they expected a throne. They expected a throne to be the greatest point of victory of Jesus. But you see, victory was not in gaining worldly power, worldly thrones, but in fact, victory was in giving his life on the cross. The only other time in the book of Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, that the description of being at Jesus' left and right is in description of the two criminals who hung on the cross beside Jesus, one on his left and one on his right. James and John, they thought they knew what greatness looked like. But actually, the greatest moment of victory was as Jesus bore the sin, paid the price, was our ransom for our sin, to release us from the grip that sin and shame and death have over each and every one of us. As Jesus laid down his life in humility and in love and in selflessness, and the call goes out for each and every one of us to live in that same way. That's what greatness looks like. It's in the giving, not in gaining. You know, in the world of chickens, it's all about getting ahead, all about being at the top by pushing others down. We humans are a little bit more civil, aren't we? But we still struggle. We still struggle with the same tendencies to climb the ladder, to seek recognition, to be first in everything. But Jesus shows us this greatness is not focused on all the gaining, but instead it's of giving, it's of serving. That serving's not a step down, but actually it's a step up. It's a step up into true greatness that Jesus demonstrated. He demonstrated the ultimate greatness of sacrificing himself, giving his life for each and every one of us who did not deserve it. And we are called to embody that same greatness, not by being the best, but humbly serving and putting the needs of others before our own. That's true greatness. That's true greatness. To sacrifice in obedience, to daily deny ourselves and pick up our cross and follow him. That's the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus is surrender. Not using our power, our position, our authority, whatever it is that we find in our hand, not using it to push other people down, but instead surrendering it over and saying, use it all to serve. We're called to serve out of love, because in doing so, we are serving the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I'd invite you to close your eyes in an attitude of prayer and reflection here. Is there something here today that you need to sacrifice or surrender, hand over, as we follow in this way to serve? How are you using what's in your hand, what's in your disposal? Your words, your time, your resources, your connections, your influence, your power, whatever it might be, what you hold in your hands. The call today is to not use it to push down, but instead to lift others up, to serve. And so today, Jesus, we fix our eyes on you, the one who came not to be served, but to serve. How much more so, Jesus, should that be our attitude? Not to be served, not to be noticed, not to gain, but to serve, to give whatever it is that we have over to you and say, not what I will, but you, whatever it is that you will. So we turn our eyes to you today, Jesus, and we pray in your name. Amen. Amen. Well, we're going to close our time here together in worship. And so I invite you to stand as we sing here together.